The Cardinals announced the severity of Sonny Gray's hamstring injury on Tuesday. Here's everything that you need to know coming up on Be Safe Daily. What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of Be Safe Daily. Brendan Schaefer here with you Tuesday, March 5th, 2024. After a two-day drive back from Jupiter, Florida to O'Fallon, Missouri, and some good hamburgers in Paducah, Kentucky, I arrived back home, and all hell finally breaks loose, as it always seems to do at some point in spring training. The adage that we say all the time on the podcast is you're always going to lose at least one starter to injury in spring training. Every year, the Cardinals lose one. Sometimes it's more, but it's never less. And the spring training injury, knock on wood that this is the only one, because this one's not particularly pleasant. It's kind of cruel, actually, when you consider the plans the Cardinals made in the offseason, but it's Sonny Gray, and it's the right hamstring. So today on Be Safe Daily, real quickly, because the news just came out, I did an article for KMOV, putting some thoughts into there. Check that out, as I always ask you guys to do. And now we're going to talk through it real quick so that I can get the news out and be as close to the forefront of this as I can with news that just dropped within the last hour or so as I'm recording this. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, though, on the channel. I'll ask once and then just hope you listen, because lots of Cardinals coverage coming from this channel throughout the season. And you can also subscribe to Be Safe Daily on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. But let's jump right into the Sonny Gray news, because that's what everybody wants to know about. Again, I'm going to be completely transparent about this. I am not in Jupiter, Florida anymore. So when the Cardinals sent out the text that at 10:30 Eastern, which is 9:30 Central, John Mozeliak would speak to reporters out on the media patio there at Cardinals camp, I wasn't out there for that, and so you won't see any of the original reporting from me on what John Mozeliak said. But all over Twitter, if you follow Derek Gould, if you follow John Denton, etc., the news is out that the Cardinals have announced a mild hamstring strain per John Mozeliak. That's the situation for Sonny Gray, who left his start on Monday early. He had recorded 5 outs, was supposed to go 3 innings, but it was the middle of the second inning when the trainer comes out, and he ends up leaving the game. The Cardinals right away say, we're going to get some imaging done. They get the MRI. It reveals a mild hamstring strain, and that's the language from John Mozeliak. And again, I wasn't there to hear it. So while I titled this video, "Here's Everything You Need to Know," what you really ought to do if you want to be utmost informed is read all the articles that'll come out from Derek Gould, because he's down there, and John Denton, I know, is down there, and there are probably others still, but since I'm not there, I couldn't tell you who was there this morning. But I saw Denton and Derek Gould tweeting about it. So if you want the best information, you don't just listen to people on YouTube. Sometimes I'm a person on YouTube who also has the best information, because I might be there, boots on the ground. But I did drive back to Missouri. 3 weeks in Florida was enough for me this year. So check out the stories that are written, but I'm going to tell you some of what we're seeing on Twitter and then contextualize it with the research I did on the history of Sonny Gray and hamstring injuries, because this is not the first time that he's dealt with issues with the right hamstring. So maybe from that history, we can know a little bit of what the Cardinals and Cardinals fans should expect. But here's a tweet I'll read from John Denton. He covers the Cardinals for MLB.com. Cardinals right-handed pitcher Sonny Gray has been diagnosed with a mild hamstring strain, per President of Baseball Operations John Mozeliak. Mo called it, quote, encouraging news, but admitted that Gray making the opening day start would be, quote, challenging. So brace yourself, the first thing, because we're just trying to digest this information, and that's why following us on YouTube can be so valuable, because we can get on here and talk through it. Right after something happens, we can talk through it. We're digesting this info. For Mo to say it's going to be challenging for Gray to start opening day feels about right, based on the timeline of if you were injured on March 4th, and that was actually April 4th, and you had a 15-day, 20-day stint on the injured list, you're going to be cutting it close to being able to make it back in that 3 weeks-ish time frame if you've got a mild hamstring strain, which in 2022, it's kind of exactly what happened to Sonny Gray then, but it was during the regular season. It wasn't during spring training. So we have a little bit of an understanding. Again, we don't know the severity and how it compares. I imagine reporters in Jupiter today will get a chance to talk with Sonny Gray, and we know that he always has been pretty forthcoming about things so far. I imagine Sonny Gray has got some insight as to, hey, how does this compare to 2022 when you went on the injured list in April with a hamstring? a right hamstring injury back in 2022. It was April, I'm looking this up right now, April 16th that he got injured. He left his start early in 2022 as a member of the Twins, and his next big league start came on May 7th. So that's about 3 weeks, and right now we're a little more than that, actually, from March 28th, which would be the opening day start in Los Angeles that Sonny Gray was scheduled to make. The Cardinals announced him as the opening day starter before this injury came about. So if it's similar to that, you could see a timeline where it's a possibility that he could start opening day. But the Cardinals may know that when they say mild, yeah, they don't mean it's a multi-month or a major issue in terms of a hamstring strain, but they may also know that it's a little bit more serious than what he had in 2022. They may know that, we do not. It's going to depend on the grade, and I'm sure these are questions that were asked that they didn't send him out in a tweet. So again, read the stories from MLB and the Post-Dispatch and all those places. But a grade 1 versus a grade 2 hamstring strain would tell us some additional information. I imagine they would say it's grade 1, just because that's the more mild of the type. And then a grade 2 partial hamstring tear is typically more painful, more problematic, longer recovery, etc. So I don't know that there was a label of a grade. They said it's mild, which could be them saying, we know it's a little bit bad, but we're going to say it's a mild grade 2, right? That would give us more info, and that's info that Derek Gould or somebody else might have because they're there asking those questions, and I'm not. And I'm going to always talk about the value of that because I think sometimes media literacy can take a back seat for people that don't really understand how the sausage is made on this. Mozeliak is talking to the reporters down there, so they're going to have that best info, but we're going to come on YouTube and try and dissect some of that. And that's going to be our role with this. Like I said, I love to be able to be there. And if this had happened a week ago, I would have been there, written about it, and then been able to tell you exactly everything that Mozeliak said and probably played some of the audio. But I don't have it. So that is what that is. But let's go back to Sonny Gray and talk about the past issues he's had with the hamstring. I mentioned he went from April 16th, injuring it, starting again on May 7th back in 2022. He continued to be healthy up until September, when on September 2nd, he left another start with another right hamstring issue. They called it right hamstring tightness. And by the way, when the Twins put him on the IL in April, they said it was a low-grade right hamstring strain. So every time we're talking about the right hamstring, it's the same leg, the same hamstring. 9/2/22, Sonny Gray leaves the start early because of right hamstring tightness, does not hit the injured list this time, and actually doesn't even miss a start. 6 days later, he's starting again and pitched pretty well, actually. 4 innings, 7 strikeouts, no runs in that next outing. But, was it only 4 innings because they wanted to be careful with him, with workload, whatever? Like, that's information that I don't know. I didn't dig that deep in the research. But that was September 2nd, 2022. I was busy having a baby be born that day. September 19th, 2022, 2.5 weeks later, again, right hamstring tightness. Sonny Gray leaves the game early and then does not pitch again for the rest of the season. I don't know if they bothered to put him on the injured list or not at that point. The Twins weren't a playoff team in 2022. It's not like he came back in the playoffs. 19th of September, another right hamstring tightness issue. Doesn't pitch again the final couple weeks of that season. But Sonny Gray in 2022 still made 24 starts during the year, but it was clear that the right hammy was something he was dealing with on a recurring basis. So what's my initial reaction to, you're in a spring training start, you're really important to the Cardinals, and you feel that twinge, whatever it is in the hamstring, that you go, all right, I recognize that it's time to take a seat. I feel like because of having this issue in the past, and it was really, I think, confined to 2022, I don't see prior to that any specific listing on the injury report for Sonny Gray of dealing with hamstring prior to the 22 season. But because you kind of have that in the back of your mind when you're on the mound yesterday and you're Sonny Gray, I imagine it was a spot where he goes, I know what this is, and I know that I've been able to make it back from this with, relatively little time missed if I don't try and push through something. So that's the first thing. I imagine that it starts barking. He's been through it before. He knows not to try and push through it and make it worse because historically it's been minimal consequences, right? You have an IL stint in April of 22, but you only miss, 3 weeks or so. And then you do end up dealing with it again in September, but at times you don't even have to miss a start. Because it's so early in the year and it's spring training, For all we know, it could be more like what happened to him on September 2nd. But they say, look, that was a deal where you were able to keep pitching, but then it cropped up again a couple of weeks later. And we're not in September baseball right now where we need to push through anything. It's March. Let's go ahead and ice this thing and see if over the next couple days, couple weeks, we see some improvement. Because if you get to March 12th, March 19th, I mean, that's a full 2 weeks at Sonny Gray. It wouldn't be impossible if this strain is similar to kind of what he experienced in April of 22. I don't think it would be impossible to see him right on that borderline for opening day. And the reality is that we need to kind of cover now. I don't think it really matters if he starts opening day. It might be nice ceremonially. You might have a better chance of beating the Dodgers and Shohei Ohtani, but it really doesn't matter for the 162 if he makes that opening day start. Because you could see a world in which he slots 5th or 6th into the rotation later on that first week of the season, and he basically doesn't miss a start because of it. Like, I think that's still a possibility with what we know now. Now, we could go a few days and they say, no, it's not responding. He's still dealing with the pain or the discomfort or whatever. And then that timeline is going to shift as a result. But as of right now, I'm basically leaning on what I see from 2022 and what happened to him back then and sort of using that to draw up a preliminary timeline. John Denton from MLB.com tweeting as I am doing this show, so I'll share more of his reporting because he's down there, boots on the ground, doing a great job. Denton says that Ollie Marmol shares on his optimism of Sonny Gray's mild hamstring. Quote, part of it is it could have been a lot worse, which was, by the way, the initial thing that I tweeted was like, okay, they could have said it's a grade 2 strain. He's going to be out, 6 to 8 weeks. Like, that could have been the initial tweet that we got today. I know that Cardinals fans get upset because it seems like when they tell us, oh, this injury is mild and it ends up being longer, that's a sign that the Cardinals don't know what they're talking about, which at times it may just be that they, you don't want people to panic. So you're always going to kind of minimize an injury, right? You're never going to come out of the gate and say, oh, it's way worse than we ever thought it could be. Like that's just going to inspire pessimism and panic, and there's no benefit to the team to do that. So understand that while I agree with you, the Cardinals' messaging on such issues historically has not been strong. You can also understand, just like any business doing PR on something that they're trying to not have be alarming to the public, they're going to typically try to err on the side of, well, let's wait and see. But again, I'll continue with the Ollie Marmol quote. Could have been a lot worse. Thankfully, he stopped when he did and didn't try to pitch through it or make another pitch. So that's part of it that makes Ollie Marmol optimistic, essentially. John Mozeliak, again, this is from John Denton. I'm just on his timeline. I'm sure others are tweeting, but this is all in this. It's one-stop shopping here. So John Denton tweets that John Mozeliak said there's optimism that the strain is not as bad as the 2 he suffered back in 2022. This quote is from Mozeliak. Less pain than what he experienced prior, but obviously a perfect day is when no one gets hurt. It's unfortunate, but it could have been worse. So think about this from Mozeliak's perspective. We can do the math from April 16th to May 7th of 2022, which was the only time he hit the injured list as a result of the hamstring thing. In September, he dealt with it, but I don't think they put him on the IL at the end of September on the 19th when he got hurt because there's like a week and a half left. And so maybe they just didn't. I don't see any record of the IL stint at that point. But when he had it going on in April, we can count how much time he missed. From the 16th to the 23rd is a week, to the 30th is another week, to May 7th is a third week. So I think exactly 3 weeks later, he returned to the big league mound and was back for the bulk stretch of the season until kind of dealing with it again in September. Mozeliak says their hope, let me make sure I get this right. Their optimism, there is optimism, I said that word weird, that his hamstring strain is not as bad as what happened either time in 2022. And Mo's reasoning behind that is that he's describing there's less pain than what he experienced prior. And pain was in parentheses, so that means that Mo didn't say the word pain, but he was probably asked, what's the pain like? And he probably said less than what he experienced prior. Perfect day is when no one gets hurt. It's unfortunate, but it could have been worse. We'll wait and see if it could have been worse, but I could absolutely see, based on, again, we're reading about what happened in 2022. We're reading about what the Cardinals are saying about it. We'll get to hear about it from Sonny Gray as well, I am sure, that they'll get a chance to talk to him down in Jupiter, because his thing yesterday was he didn't want to talk to the media, declined because he wanted to wait to see the MRI as well. He didn't want to start talking about something that he didn't have any idea what the ramifications were going to be, because if you start saying one thing and then you find out it's a grade 2 or it's, different than what you thought it was going to be, there's no benefit to that. So totally understand that from Sonny's perspective. I imagine he'll be willing now to talk now that there's a little bit more of an understanding of what's going on. And we might get that comparison from him as far as what's it like compared to 2022. But I imagine Mo coming up with it saying, well, there's less pain now than there was, happens because he's already talked to the player as well, and that's been communicated to Mo. So that would be my guess on that. But the question of, like, could he miss opening day? Yeah, absolutely, because we just did the math. Let's say it's not less severe of a strain than what he experienced in April of 2022. Even though Mo says they're optimistic that it could be based on having less pain than he did that time, what's the timeline now look like from here to March 28th? It's the 5th of March. You could go to the 12th, to the 19th, to the 26th. That's 3 weeks. There is time, technically, for him to return and make that start in Los Angeles on March 28th, based on that timeline. But it's spring training. He's the ace you signed for 3 years to be the front of the rotation starter. We asked Ollie Marmol, like, did you envision making him the open day starter back when you guys were trying to sign him? He's like, yeah, this was always their plan, to have him be the guy that sets the tone in the rotation. So if it's a decision between, well, we think he might be good to go on the 28th, and it would really be good for the PR of it if he doesn't miss any time at all, versus, hey, you can push him toward the back of that rotation or do what they were already thinking about doing and having it be a 6-man rotation to start the season. And maybe that means Zach Thompson and Matthew Liberatore are in the rotation and Gray makes the 7th start. Or maybe you just push him back to the home opener, which is basically 1 week after the season opener in Los Angeles. Like, all these things are possibilities that will very minimally impact the Cardinals season. What will impact the season is if you push it and say, we're right on that 3-week window, we could push it here, but then as a result, he's compensating for something in the hamstring still, and a few weeks later, or a month later, or 6 months later, when it's September and you really need him, bang, it's another hamstring thing because you didn't take ample time on the front end to make sure it was healed up. So that's why I think the Cardinals have no business, and they didn't. They have no business coming out and saying, oh, we think he could still make it for opening day. No, it's like, look, opening day is not the measurement here. It's, can we get him back without this really impacting much of his season? Because I think that's the way you look at it that actually has a tangible effect on what happens to the Cardinals this year. Not whether he pitches March 28th or April 4th or April 11th. Like, that's all going to be mild. And honestly, nobody will like to hear this because they're not super enthused by Zach Thompson and Liberatore being the rotation depth for the team at this point, that's who it is. And I can understand you could look at last year and go, well, they were rather inconsistent, so that doesn't give me a lot of confidence, which is fine. But also, it could give the Cardinals some time to parse out which of those guys actually should be, more considered in that mix if both or one of them are getting more substantial opportunities on the front end of the season. So they could use it as a chance to learn about a couple of those guys, which is not what you want. Mo said that the best day is the day where nobody gets hurt. So you'd rather Sonny Gray be in there. But if he's not, it's a hopefully more like a 7 to 10 day delay than anything that you could even measure in a matter of weeks of the regular season. That's my initial impression based on what they're saying. But, now you hold your breath for what are the next few days going to look like? When does a timeline come into focus for the Cardinals on Sonny Gray? Because, yeah, I mean, you don't want to be behind the 8 ball from a starting pitching perspective when this season begins, because the whole thing was the Cardinals. And I have commented on this. I've written about it for KMOV, how anytime we would ask about pitching depth, the Cardinals and John Mozeliak would kind of say, well, we really like the 5 that we have. We've got depth. We've got other guys, but we really want the 5 that we have to be making 30 starts. Okay. I mean, that's what they said. And we said, well, it sounds awesome in theory, but it's difficult because how often does that really happen? You have to go back to like 2015, the last time the Cardinals just had sterling rotation health and everybody basically made all their starts outside of like Michael Wacha missed a few, I think, and everybody else was 30 plus essentially. And that was almost 10 years ago at this point. And that was viewed as a major outlier season from a starting rotation standpoint. They got great health. Every year since then, you've had a guy go down in spring training, and you could go back and look. I'm telling you, it's been every single year. It's not just like almost every year. Whether it was Michaelis or Carlos Martinez or Adam Wainwright or, I'm telling you, every year it happens. I've been covering it almost that whole time. So that's the situation you're in for a team that did not go out and add depth to the rotation behind the starting five. They said, our depth is the quality of the starting five and the reliability of that starting five. They took away Hudson and Jake Woodford, which those guys weren't really major contributors, but they were that depth group. And they basically said, we're not adding to the depth group. We just need the young guys that are in that group to know that it's going to be them this time. And we need to see somebody step up. So we have to, we can stop paying 5 pitchers $11+ million every season and just going out and picking up scraps in free agency to try to hold this thing together with duct tape. Like, they would like to be able to develop some pitchers. And now they've kind of put themselves in a position where they almost have to do it behind their starting five. Either that, or you just, you carve out enough wins in the first few months and then you do something at the trade deadline. But that's another temporary solution. So we're going to see what these guys are made of. Liberatore, Zach Thompson, it now becomes a big spring for them because you see, at least for the first week or two of the regular season, there might be a real opportunity in not only a 6-man rotation if they were to go that route, but a 5-man rotation for either of these guys to take a spot and start in that group. What do you think, Cardinals fans? Let me know your reaction to the Sonny Gray news in the comment section below. It is not what the Cardinals were hoping for. Again, it's a little cruel that, hey, somebody's going to get hurt, but it had to be this guy. It had to be the one that's the ace of the rotation that was really the upside that you could represent in the rotation. Sonny Gray, mild hamstring strain. Mozeliak calls it challenging for him to be ready for the home opener, or rather the opening day in Los Angeles on March 28th. Doesn't mean he's not going to be, but I would say if he's saying it's challenging, you probably shouldn't expect him, and it's probably going to be a bit of a delay. Now, how much of a delay and whether or not that has a tangible impact on the Cardinals season is sort of what we're talking about at that point. I am going to comment upon the notion of, should the Cardinals now go out and get somebody? Because that's Twitter just immediately jumped to, well, yep, this is why you needed depth. They need to go out and get somebody. Go sign Jordan Montgomery. Go sign Blake Snell. Do a whole podcast on why they're not signing Jordan Montgomery. They're also not signing Blake Snell, but they're definitely not signing Jordan Montgomery. But nevertheless, the topic keeps coming up, and people are like, well, why don't you ask about this? Why isn't this? John Mozeliak was asked about it today. I'm reading this in Katie Wu's story. I didn't know Katie was down there, but I think maybe she made it back because I know she was gone for just a couple days. So she's got a full-fledged story as well with The Athletic. And a quote from Mozeliak of, quote, I definitely feel that is not something that is required at this point. And in parentheses, that was adding pitching depth. So I imagine the question, again, when you read these quotes, how does it come to be? Somebody asked, would you guys go out and make an outside addition as a result of the Gray injury? And Mo says, I definitely feel that's not something that's required at this point. If something changes, we'd have to look at it differently, but we're not thinking we'll have to do that at this point. That's a quote from John Mozeliak. So, and I saw a report, I think from Derek earlier today, that they haven't reached out to the camps of Blake Snell or Jordan Montgomery recently, which is not a surprise to me at all. I understand why Cardinals fans would go, well, look, you didn't really hit the benchmark of payroll that you said you could. So you have a pitching injury, and we know what starting pitching attrition did to this team last year. It was a major contributor to 91 losses. Go sign Montgomery. He's already been here before. Like, I know that's everybody's thought. Sonny Gray right now may not even miss opening day. He probably will, and he'll probably miss a week or two in April. But that's really the lens through which they're viewing this. You don't have another spot to offer on the multi-year deal that some of these starting pitchers on the market are surely still seeking. I know they'll do a short-term deal, kind of like Bellinger did with the Cubs. The Cardinals aren't looking to pay $30 million to a starting pitcher right now because Sonny Gray might miss a week or two. I know that Sonny Gray could miss longer. You know that. I know that. And the Cardinals do too. But they're not viewing it as what's going to happen because from what the MRI told them, it's a mild hamstring strain. So for right now, they don't think they need to change their view of their depth situation as a result. And I want to finish with this. A lot of people, even before the Sonny Gray injury, were saying you need to sign another starter. Realistically, that was never going to happen. And I've talked with this about this with the Cat on Hot Take Central on 590 The Fan, which I'm on that show every Friday with Cat and Cam Jansen. So check that out if you like those people, because they're great. But we've talked about this where it's like the reason the Cardinals didn't add another starter was, first of all, Mo said they need 3, and they got 3. You may not agree with the 3 that they got, but they did get 3, right? He didn't say we're going to get 3 with these characteristics. He said we're going to get 3, and everybody said, ooh, they need 3 with these characteristics, and we all filled in the blanks, and then they got 3. So they did, in their mind, is exactly what they set out to do. It's just that the guys that like Kyle Gibson and Lance Lynn have maybe less upside than some of the guys that we all kind of thought a trade. You could make a trade for one of those spots, and they didn't make a trade. And in fact, of the guys that I thought they should trade for, only Tyler Glasnow actually did get traded. And the Dodgers gave Pepio, I think is how you say that, Pepiot, a pretty good pitching prospect that the Cardinals didn't have a pitching prospect as good as that guy. So I don't think they could have even gotten Tyler Glasnow without overpaying in position players, which maybe they should have done. Maybe they should have tried to do. We don't know what the Rays would have wanted or how far the Cardinals got, if at all, into talks about Tyler Glasnow. The Dodgers obviously have infinite payroll and say so they were happy to do that, but it didn't happen for the Cardinals. Nobody else, not Dylan Cease, not Logan Gilbert, not Brian Wu, like none of these other guys that I thought would be great trade targets if you were going to trade from your glut of position players, whether it was Gorman, whether it was Donovan, which I said you can't trade Donovan, whether it was whoever it would have been that you would have traded. Edman, people wanted to trade Edman, but he was injured all offseason, so that was never realistic from a value standpoint. Like you weren't trading Edman for one of those type of starters. It just wasn't. It was not ever going to happen. The values weren't going to match up. Those pitchers did not get traded by their teams. And that was the challenge, I think, because we all saw on paper it would make sense. Oh, if the Cardinals could just do this, they've got an extra thing here that they could trade for this thing that they don't have. But those teams never traded those players, so those were not actual opportunities, ultimately. Like, we can look at the Glasnow one. That's the only one we can look at. And if you want to dissect why the Cardinals didn't make that deal and should they have pursued it for a guy that the Rays were definitely trying to trade, because they ultimately did trade him, then that's a conversation for sure. But at this point, you've got 5 starters that you're paying. Steven Matz, I think, makes the least at $11 million, and then Lynn and Gibson are like 12, 13, whatever it is. And Michaelis is on his extension, and we know Sonny Gray's contract situation. They're paying their whole 5-man rotation. They're not just going to go out into the market and sign another guy to a $10, $20 million contract and be like, hey, you could be in our rotation. Because if I'm that guy, I'm like, don't you have 5 starters? Am I in your rotation? Like Jordan Montgomery, Blake Snell, yeah, they're not getting. It's going to be a deal where if they were to do it, Steven Matz would get bumped, and that would be a hard conversation. But that is what you would do. But if you signed like another Steven Matzy guy to like a $10, $11 million swingman, why would I, as that guy, sign with the Cardinals knowing they've got 5? Like, I would probably say, I'm going to sign somewhere else that, I'll wait for the spring training injury. I don't know who's still out there in that bucket, but I just don't ever think it was realistic for the Cardinals to have their 5 starters like they do now, and then the 6th one to come via a signing. I don't think it was ever going to happen. It's not the way they were going to view roster building. You can be upset about that. I'm just saying, like, it's not, you're barking up the wrong tree if you're thinking that this is about to come to fruition. Like, Jordan Montgomery's not coming. What's his name? Blake Snell is not walking through that door. So maybe if 2 weeks go by and Sonny Gray's hamstring they find out it's worse than they thought or whatever, then literally, as Mozeliak said, then that could change their thinking. We'd have to look at it differently, is what he said. But we're not thinking we'll have to do it at this point. So that's the Cardinals' take on the Sonny Gray hamstring news from Tuesday. Hopefully this was everything you needed to know. If there was something you need to know that I didn't tell you, ask about it in the comments below, and I'll get to you. Appreciate you guys as always. Hit that subscribe button if you enjoy Cardinals content on the Reg. That's what you'll get throughout the season. Read my articles at KMOV, and subscribe to B-Shape Daily on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you don't want to have to listen to it on YouTube. That'll do it for this edition of the show. Appreciate you guys so much. We'll talk to you next time on B-Shape Daily. Peace.